But just as important is getting the needed balance of the different omega-3 essential fatty acids. So, for example, ALA, alpha linolenic acid, is antioxidative, anti-inflammatory, and it affords wonderful cardiovascular protection. However, EPA, which is eicosapentaenoic acid, is absolutely crucial for your neurotransmission and the repairs the damage at your nerve terminal ends. Whereas DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, is vital for neuronal support and structure and cell membrane stability. And it is in the main cell body and in the mitochondria cell membranes. Crucially important. Each of these vital, important omega-3s are running very different operations in our cells and in our bodies. And the balance of these must be in our diets to protect our overall health. We are now beginning to see neurological degeneration on both ends of life. We have autism at approximately 1 in 30 or even less in our children today. And we have 1 in 44 adults are now in this autistic spectrum. We have over 10% of our children are currently struggling with ADHD. We have over 6.7 million Americans struggling with Alzheimer's over age 65. And that number is expected to more than double in the next 35 years. Dementia. Again, we have another 6.7 million Americans over the age 65 that are struggling with Alzheimer's dementia today. And this number will grow and double to almost 14 million by 2060. And so you have to ask why. Our present processed food system offers such nutrient-deficient food that's loaded with so many oxidative and inflammatory products. And this quickly turns into destructive cellular poisons that we can no longer hope to achieve the end of our lives with our neurological capacities intact. But now we are unable to even begin life with neurological properties intact. Let's look at the infant brain. At birth, a newborn has a brain 33% the size of an adult, but it's going to increase at about 1% per day. By 3 months, the brain mass has increased by 64%, and it's now about 55% of the size of an adult brain. Our brains are composed of 60% or more fats. There's a lot of fat needed in a very short period of time. Now, mother's breast milk is loaded, can be loaded with omega-3s, but only if the mother has adequate omega-3 intake. Otherwise, if she's deficient, the baby's neurological development is not going to be supported adequately. And you look at the standard American diet right now, our diet is so massively deficient in omega-3s and so excessive in oxidizing omega-6s that these infant brains are not neurologically developing because the proper nutrition is not there, not only for the construction material, but they are absent for the functional capacities in the brain as well. A closer look at the omega-3s tells us that all of these essential fatty acids are not the same, and they're not doing the same cellular and metabolic functions in our bodies. So, for example, our linolenic acid, ALA, our 18 carbon chain fatty acids, are more antioxidative, anti-inflammatory, and these afford cardiovascular protection as well as to our other organs. Yet our 20 carbon chain EPAs and ETAs, these are incredibly vital for our neurotransmission and are the repairs of our nerve terminal ends. And so our neurological functions are being driven by these fatty acids. Then you take our DHA and DPA, docosahexaenoic acid, our 22 carbon chain fatty acids. These are for cellular membrane, our neuron structures. And these are in our main cells and also in the cells of our mitochondria. These anti-inflammatory, antioxidative capacities of ALA. Another thing that is so critical about EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, is it helps reduce inflammation at the nerve terminal ends, and it helps repair the damage to neuron membranes caused by the toxic effects of fructose. And fructose is in so much a part of our diet. And EPA also has positive effects on cardiovascular disease, depression, menopause, and rheumatoid arthritis. Looking at the omega-3s in the brain, the gray matter, which governs intelligent thought, found in the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, it's composed of neuron cell bodies that make up the central nervous system. Gray matter is found in the outer layers of the brain. It's the grayish in color. Eicosapentaenoic acid, omega-3, is essential for this neuron transmission. It reduces inflammation and it repairs damage to the neuronal membranes caused by toxins such as fructose. White matter and gray matter is your central nervous system. Now look at the white matter in the brain. This is the brain's highways and tracks. It acts as the brain's communication system. Okay, this connects different parts of gray matter, and it facilitates and coordinates the brain functions. This contains lots of nerve fibers, these axons, which are surrounded by a protective fatty coat called myelin sheath. And this is what gives it its white color. White matter connects nerve cells or neurons. Docosahexaenoic acid is essential for this neuronal structure and cell membrane stability. Docosahexaenoic acid is absolutely essential in both the main cell body and in the mitochondrial cell membrane. Both DHA and EPA are reductive in inflammation response in the fat cells, and they prevent the release of free fatty acids. And this keeps them from reaching the liver where they get packaged into triglycerides. It is also proven that omega-3s can prevent heart disease. Let's look at some beneficial roles of omega-6s. The eicosanoids made from omega-6s are generally more potent mediators of inflammation, vasoconstriction, and platelet aggregation than those made from omega-3s, although there's some exceptions. Both classes of fatty acids compete for the same desaturase enzymes. So alpha-linolenic acid, omega-3, is a competitive inhibitor of linoleic acid, omega-6, in metabolism and vice versa. Similarly, EPA and DHA, omega-3s, can compete with arachidonic acid and synthesis of other eicosanoids. The higher concentrations of EPA and DHA than arachidonic acid tip the eicosanoic balance towards less inflammatory activities. This is better understood when we look at the metabolic pathways of omega-3s and omega-6s. You have the delta desaturase 6, delta desaturase 5, and delta desaturase 4 enzymes. But both omega-3 and omega-6 are processed by the same pathway, the same enzymatic processes. And so within our bodies, we do not have this sorting system of too few threes and too many sixes. Our pathways process the omega-3s and omega-6s in the balance in which our diets bring them in. Our 18-carbon chain omega-3s and omega-6 go through delta-6 desaturase enzymes. Our 20-carbon chain, both omega-3s and omega-6, go through delta-5 desaturase enzymes, while the delta-4 desaturase enzymes process the 22-carbon chain omega-3s and omega-6s. Within these pathways, a balanced ratio is going to promote health, where an imbalanced ratio of 25 omega-6s to 1 omega-3, that ratio, if that's our dietary ratio, that will end up in our cells. In delta-5 desaturase, balanced dietary intake is going to promote health. A ratio of 25 omega-6s to 1 omega-3 is going to have neurological transmission effects on our brain's ability, because we are not supporting in an adequate amount that structure that is required for neurotransmission. In your delta-4 desaturase enzymes, a balance is going to provide that healthy cognitive neuronal structure. An imbalance and excess oxidation is going to cause destructive properties within our neurons and our nerve structure. As we look at the sources of omega-6 and omega-3 essential fatty acids, we find that they come from very different materials. So as a distinction, we look at ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, as primarily being a plant-based product, whereas EPA and DHA are very low in plants but extremely high in aquatic-based products. So these are phytoplankton and algae-based food sources that create the higher levels of EPA and DHA. And so as we look at the ratio of wild salmon versus farm-raised salmon, this shows up very distinctly. Wild salmon that was caught in August of 2018 near Juneau, Alaska, tested at 25 omega-3s to just 1 omega-6, whereas farm-raised salmon that was purchased in a national grocery store chain tested at virtually 1 omega-3 to 1 omega-6. Now, you might think, well, that's a balanced ratio, that's healthy. However, the reason that we're consuming salmon or wild fish is because we're needing to get the other essential omega-3 fatty acids into our diet for our neurological support. So let's examine both wild and farm-raised salmon closer. In grams, wild salmon had less than 1 gram of omega-6 linoleic acid and just over 1 gram of arachidonic acid. In the omega-3 side, we had almost 35 grams of DHA, which is absolutely necessary for neuronal structure in the white matter within the brain. You have EPA at almost 7 grams, which is needed for neurotransmission in the gray matter in the brain. And you have the lowest ratio of ALA of under 3. As you can see here, wild salmon is massively antioxidative and anti-inflammatory in relation to the oxidative and inflammatory balances of omega-6. Let's look at the farm-raised salmon, omega-6 to omega-3. While it has a balanced ratio, let's look at the components within the ratios of 6s and 3s. Omega-6, we have less than 2/3 of a gram arachidonic acid, and we have almost 15 grams of linoleic acid. On the omega-3 side, we have 4.88 grams of DHA, we have 3.07 grams of EPA, and we have a higher ALA of 5.5 grams, and this is because they're fed grain. In farm-raised salmon operations, there's far less natural food and far more grain-fed products in their diets. When you compare wild salmon versus farm-raised salmon, on the omega-3 side, your wild salmon in grams just under 35 DHA, whereas your farm-raised salmon is just under 5 grams of DHA. Your EPA is right at 7 on your wild salmon, and it's just over 3 on your farm-raised. You have less than 3% ALAs in your wild salmon, but almost double that in your farm-raised salmon due to the grains. Now, there's another critical distinction here. Farm-raised salmon are genetically engineered, which means that they're going to have altered genes. So that's going to affect their proteins, their carbohydrates, and their fats and oils. This leads to toxicity and allergenic reactions. But in addition to that, farm-raised salmon do not have a natural diet. They're heavily supported with grain and plant-based products, in addition to the antibiotics and other chemicals that's required to keep them in caged farming operations, even if they're in the ocean. All of this makes it a very unhealthy, non-nutritious product. Further comparison of the omega-3s in wild salmon versus farm-raised salmon. Your DHA in your wild salmon is 726% higher than in your farm-raised salmon. Your DPA is 375% higher in wild versus farm-raised. EPA is 225% higher in wild salmon versus farm-raised salmon. And your farm-raised salmon is 187% higher in ALAs versus your wild salmon. We created this comparison between beef and the healthy and unhealthy omega-6 to omega-3 ratios of differently fed cattle, and then also the salmon, wild salmon versus farm-raised. On the beef side, the omega balanced natural beef at a ratio of approximately 1:1 has a diet of fermented forages. The Snake River Farms ribeye beef with an omega-6 ratio of 26.5:1 has a diet almost purely of corn. The Omaha steak ground beef with an omega-6 ratio of 20.46:1 omega-3 has a diet of corn and grain. Looking at the salmon, wild salmon has an omega-3 ratio of 25:1 omega-6. This is why salmon is considered so healthy, because it has such an antioxidative offset for so many oxidative omega-6s in our diet. Now, wild salmon is algae and phytoplankton based. That's its food sources. And this is where the antioxidation omega-3s come from. But when you look at farm-raised salmon, which is typically given grains, you have about a 1:1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Here, on farm-raised salmon, you have lost all of the antioxidant potential in the meat. The comparison here is that the wild salmon which is phytoplankton and algae based, in comparison to the Omega Balanced Natural Beef, which is plant based. And so these type of foods that are consumed either by salmon or by beef reflect a very different essential fatty acid ratio. The point here is that beef and bison are not the same. In total grams of omega-3 essential fatty acids, the wild salmon has nearly 50 grams, whereas the omega-3 balanced beef has approximately 2. Within the salmon profile, you have DHA, docosahexaenoic acid, at 34.87 grams. This is incredibly important for neuron and nerve structure and cell membrane structure. You have DPA at 4.2 grams, EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, 6.9 grams. That is super critical for neurological transmission. You have an ALA content of just 2.97 grams. So in relation to the percentage of the different fatty acids, the wild salmon of its omega-3 profile contains 71% of the total omega-3 antioxidant essential fatty acids, 9% in the DPA, 14% in EPA, and only 6% in ALA. Now, compare that to the percentage found in beef. ALA, because it is plant-fed, plant-based, 79% alpha-linolenic acid. It's only 5% eicosapentaenoic acid. DPA is 14%, and docosahexaenoic acid is 2%. Now, these essential omega-3s are very, very healthy, and they're both in an excellent and healthy ratio. But the point is plant-based versus phytoplankton and algae-based meats produce a very, very different profile of essential omega-3 fatty acids. There are different types of omega-3 essential fatty acids. In fact, there are 8. These different types of omega-3 fatty acids each perform very different functions in our bodies. While a balance ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 essential fatty acids is critical and crucial for our cellular and our metabolic health, having an adequate intake of specific omega-3s, such as eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, and docosahexaenoic acid, known as DHA, are very critical for our neurological health and functions. As an example, wild-caught salmon and fish in general have much higher levels of omega-3 essential fatty acids, especially the EPA, DPA, and DHA, as these essential fatty acids come from algae and phytoplankton-based diets, whereas farm-raised salmon are primarily grain-fed. Therefore, their essential fatty acid profile is more alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, with very little EPA and DHA essential fatty acids. The omega-3 essential fatty acid ratios in beef vary greatly from those found in salmon. The right natural foods and meats with balanced essential fatty acid groups are essential for our cellular and our metabolic health. In the end, what really matters is whether it's our vegetables or our livestock. We need to be growing it and producing it in a nutrient-rich, healthy environment. And these food sources need to be in their natural and healthy form. And that is what sustains human life, human health, and metabolic function.